Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show, we're talking about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Ms. Marvel. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, I was wondering whether we were going to get those conversations or not, but like between Kamala and her mom, because her grandmother wanted them to come to Karachi. So I'm like, okay, so maybe they're going to talk it out. They're already on the plane. I'm like, okay, are we skipping over the conversations? Like, yeah, she never talked to her mom about what this was all about. She's just like, yeah, grandma says we need to come to Karachi for her, and just kind of like, well, I think her mom sees it as an opportunity. It's like, right, she hasn't probably been back to Pakistan in a very, very long time. And so maybe that's what that is. And she's like, right, this gives me an opportunity for one to like her and to Kamala kind of squash what's going on right now, because it's like, right, there's just so much Kamala's not telling her about what's going on. So it's like, all right, we'll go back, we'll go to Karachi. Like, let's kind of put this, let's make a truce right now. Your grandma hasn't seen you in a while, and I haven't been back here. So like, let's just kind of make everything clear and okay. And obviously, it's this interesting, I think it's kind of an interesting perspective of, it's kind of a little bit of a culture shock to some extent, just because, like, obviously this is a culture that Kamala knows, but she's never been back to what is essentially her home, because she's lived in the U.S. her entire life. And I think it is almost this thing of like, right, we're getting introduced to like a, country I've never been to, and, we got peeks into the culture, but even more so. So like, it's not just you that kind of feels a culture show to see, to the point one of her cousins, it's kind of a dick for it, calls her an ABCD, an American-born confused Desi. So it's kind of, because like he made certain, like he looked at her certain times and was almost looking at her a certain way, because basically at one point he was like, oh, Old Town is where like some of the oldest residents here kind of live, and she's like, oh, like Florida, and he just kind of stared at her because she made an American reference, like she was trying to equate it to something she knew, like, right, Florida here in the U.S. is where most, like, that's kind of the stereotype. I think it's still like statistically true that most older retired people move to Florida. That's where people go to retire. So I get like but I think for him, it was almost disrespectful, because it's like, yeah, show some respect to like the older residents who live here, like, but also probably didn't appreciate her making like an American-based reference. But even he was like, oh, an ABCD, and he had explained. She's like, yes, I know what it is. He's like, yeah, I'm sure you would, because I guess it's something she's heard enough that it's just kind of like, which I think that's such an interesting thing, that even, because she does still feel like an outsider, because like she's eating some of the food and she's like, oh my god, this is so spicy. Why is this so spicy? Because it's like, yeah, probably like, even when things probably aren't as like, her family probably doesn't have as much of the, probably doesn't lean into a lot of that stuff as much, just because they probably like, not that they've lost touch with the culture in any shape or form, but probably it's just like certain like delicacies and stuff like that. You probably, or just like the way certain things are made back home, you probably don't lean into that as much in America than you probably would back home. So that's kind of interesting. And I do love that you can immediately tell there is still that little bit of awkwardness between Kamala's mom and her grandma. Like, because like there's no awkwardness between Kamala and her grandmother, but it's like it is there's some kind of like unresolved tension they haven't really resolved, which I'll go ahead and talk about. I think is interesting, that I think we got a little bit more insight into why Kamala's mom is the way she is towards Kamala, because for her it's like, all right, you're older now, I want you to move to America with me. And even her Sana's like, oh, you want me to move? She's like, I thought you moved as far away. You went to the U.S. to get as far away from me. She's like, no, I didn't really do that. I did it to get away from all of this. Like, I couldn't live a normal life here, just because the entire time she was being shunned. It doesn't, I'm sure it played a role in it, but it isn't just about Aisha. It's about Sana as well. How it's like, oh, my weird grandmother, her theories, and it sounds like her husband left her because of all of that. And she's like, oh yeah. Or I don't know whether she's referencing that, or like, oh, he left, or probably might be talking in the ethereal sense, because it might be in the ethereal sense of dad died. This might be what she's trying to say when she said left. Maybe she meant it like he literally just left, or it is the thing of like he died. Either way, it's just like she didn't have anyone to balance her mom out. So like her mom, like your fantastical theories and stuff like that. And I think that's why she's so hard on Kamala about like, oh, don't get lost in your fantasies and stuff. That's why she tries to be so strict with, because her mother wasn't there for her in a sense, because like, yeah, I had to deal with the craziness that was my mom and her fantasy and her wild theory, because her mom was kind of seen as like the crazy old lady, and now it's like, she went to such an extreme with Kamala, and maybe that's also why it hits a certain way, because Kamala reminds her so much of her own mother, like her getting lost in her own fantasies, that she doesn't want her daughter to become like her mom and eventually be ostracized or something like that. So obviously none of that got resolved, but it's still there. So that's going to be an interesting thing, because it isn't just about Kamala reconnecting with her family. It's also about her mom doing it too, because there has been that disconnect in the family. But yeah, Kamala is trying to, obviously, like, her grandmother told her about the train, because it's like her grandmother knows about them being a djinn, and she's like, how are you saying this so casually? It's like, I'm barely figuring this all out, because she's like, my mind's like, because her grandmother's like, even if we're djinn, even if for whatever reason, I'm able to see the train too, it doesn't matter. Like, you know, finding the answers you're looking for is kind of what matters most. Like, I saw the train, you're a djinn, like, that's all there is to it. Just, why fuss about the facts? Just kind of accept them as they are, just kind of move on. But for Kamala, it's like, how are you so calm about this? Because for her, it's like, my mind's going in like 100 different ways and places and trying to piece 100 different things together. And she's like, the more I try to fix things, the more I end up breaking them. And I love that line from her grandmother, who said, if you live the life I have and you've lost what you've lost, what I've lost, then you see the beauty in those pieces. Because even in the chaos and just kind of the messed upness of kind of the world, it's interesting timing, because obviously Westworld started back this week, and obviously that's the thing with Dolores' character, of seeing the beauty in the world. Obviously she eventually grew to see it, not just be programmed to see the beauty in the world. But it's kind of that thing of kind of, you know, just being more optimistic, seeing the beauty even in the pieces, that I think that even when things are kind of bad, that you can still find there's silver linings, that there's good that can come out of it. Like even the things kind of being shattered in this puzzle piece, it's like you can still appreciate certain pieces and the beauty in said pieces. So she even had this interesting conversation with Kamala later on, where it's like Kamala's trying to figure things out herself, and her grandmother's like, even at my age, I still don't fully know who I am. She's like, my passport reads Pakistan, my roots are India, and yet, you know, and those, and in between all that are borders divided and created by some random Englishmen that we're still adhering to today. So it comes with its complications and its complexities, and I like that. That is kind of like a hard thing to know where you're from when you have such a complicated circumstance of an upbringing. So I thought that was such an interesting and powerful conversation, but also connecting her and Kamala both being like, right, we're all at the end, try to also make Kamala realize, like, doesn't matter, like, everyone's still trying to figure themselves out. Even at my age, I haven't figured out fully who I am, because identity is such a hard thing to kind of fully nail down, just because, like, of arbitrary borders that are created by someone else, you know? It's also sad too that her and Nikita aren't on good terms. Nakia are not on good terms right now, because she's messaging Nakia like, oh, please, I'll explain everything. So Bruno probably smoothed over some of that, but still the whole thing of, I'm your best friend and you didn't tell me, that's gonna rub her the wrong way. And it's kept, like, she needs time to kind of sit with this, and, you know, so we'll see where things kind of go with that going forward. But when she's off investigating, Kamala runs into Kareem, who is played by Aramis Knight, which the thing I best know him for is MK in Into the Badlands. Great show if you've never seen it. It did get canceled, but it has enough of an ending where you're like, okay, you could see there being room for more, but it's enough of a solid ending that you could accept it as just being the ending that it is, but you could definitely tell there's room for so much more. Either way, I did not know he was in this show until, like, I want to say before Miss Marvel started airing. It was like the red carpet event. He was at the red carpet. I was like, oh, I didn't know you were in this show too. I mean, obviously you have people unrelated to certain MCU projects show up on some of those, but typically it's mainly like the cast and producers and directors and stuff like that. But still, I did not know he was going to be in the show until, like, that. I think it was like a red carpet or so. And so I was like, oh, that's pretty dope. That was kind of a nice introduction. I thought it was interesting because he could sense the Noor in Kamala, but he was almost like, wait, what are you? Because the way she's using her powers, and it's like no other clandestine has been able to do what she's doing, and especially to manifest itself in such a way to be able to control the Noor like that, because it doesn't seem possible. Even to the point when she meets Walid later on, he comments on the fact is there's an inscription on her bangle that says, what you are seeking is seeking you. So maybe it's kind of like the answers of who you are. Because it's like that might have been more so related to Aisha, or maybe who ended up having the bangles before Aisha. Maybe in that regard. Because it seemed like Aisha was the last one to wear these bangles. We haven't really gone on a conversation of where she is. Because wherever she is, which she might have gotten she might be back in their world of Nord. She might be there. Because it's like there hasn't been any conversation about it, because obviously they all age very slowly, so she's the same way too, so she has to be in the other world. I wonder, once again, is it kind of that saying thing that the more, like, the older you not the older, like, the more diluted the bloodline gets, so it does seem like it's now, because I brought up the Invincible conversation about, like, Viltrumite blood. It seems like, yeah, this is more like Saiyans. The more time that passed, the more diluted it gets, because her grandmother's older and so is her mom. So they are aging at like a normal human rate rather than like a slower rate like a clandestine would. So, but I love the little back and forth, kind of like the little like quips they have back and forth. And she's like, "Oh, who taught you how to jump?" or something, like a Ninja Turtle. He's like, "Who taught you Donkey Kong?" And she was almost like, she's like, all right, it's kind of a nice like equivalent comeback. So, but they had kind of hit it off. He's apparently part of an organization called the Red Dagger. I don't know whether that's supposed to be signifying like, right, they're both, like, him and Walid are both Red Daggers, but I'm curious, like, are they all that remains? Is it kind of like a master teacher thing of like there's typically only two, and eventually it passes on to the one? I wonder, is that because there was no one else there, or maybe the rest of the Red Daggers died off. They never really went into that, but basically they ended up explaining that obviously there are multiple dimensions out there. And that actually, because I haven't watched Loki in a while, I forgot at least how He Who Remains, or Kang, described it, is basically the multiverses are stacked on top of each other. He kind of had he used a representation of almost like these plates stacked on top of each other with space in between, but it might be more like his dark material, where it's like there's a thin space in between, like you could cut into the seams of the fabric of the universe and slide into another universe or whatever. Like maybe it's something more like that, because this particular world that the clandestine are from, the Nor, are as it's such a parallel to this world that if Najma and the others get their way, it is going to be bleed, that force is going to bleed over into this world until it's gone. So their world will end up consuming ours if that veil ever gets broken. And that's their duty, to protect the world from the unseen. There's a lot of like protectors around the world. Obviously you have that. I mean, I guess Doctor Strange and them are like, their main thing is kind of like the greater, it's not the unseen necessarily, it's more like the cosmic, like, realities and stuff like that, kind of the multiverse and stuff. But theirs, it's kind of like the unseen parts of this world. I guess they kind of really defend against that. And he'd also brought up something interesting where he was basically like, right, the clandestine aren't the jinn you know about in religious texts and you hear in stories. He's like, if Thor landed in the Himalayas, he would have been considered a jinn as well. So it's like, that's why it's like jinn isn't the exact translation. It's like clandestine is the more appropriate thing. They're labeled as jinn because they came here and just, it's like that's the closest thing that they could be compared to. But it's like, yeah, if Thor, a Norse god, came down, he'd be a jinn as well, just because he is kind of so it's not a one for one. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. At the same time, the clandestine did break out of the damage control's max security place, but they left Cameron behind because he made his choice, so he's kind of off on his own. So I'm assuming he'd probably, they found their way to Kamala and in Karachi, but the problem is, like, they're a team, they probably have the resources. Cameron's on his own, so he'll probably because he probably doesn't know that Kamala isn't here, isn't in New Jersey anymore. Which I love that whole thing of like, oh yeah, he references her being American. She's like, how do you know I'm not Canadian? He's like, yeah, then why are you wearing a shirt from that says New Jersey? But I did love that whole chase sequence I thought was pretty bad. It just kind of like they're rummaging through the streets. It kind of felt almost something like out of a Captain America Civil War in that regard. Kind of meets like one of the Jason Bourne movies. It felt like, I mean, you see him a lot in any action thing, but those are the two things that immediately came to my mind with that. Like, especially like it's surprising like how much was on foot, but considering all the alleyways and stuff and the like higher places you're trying to get to, it makes sense for them to mainly be on foot. Getting to drive again, granted it was she still ended up backing up, but came through in the end when she ended up smashing full speed into that one dude. But sadly, when the time came, Wallet is dead. Not unless he's not dead, but it seems like they're pretty much like, no, he's dead. And so it's up to Kareem and Kamala to kind of handle things on their own. And I did like that he gave her that, it's like, right, the fabric is meant to represent like, so you never forget where you're from. So I'm assuming that fabric he had given her that she's wearing, I'm sure that's what eventually is going to get fashioned into the blue part of her suit. The kind of overcoat or vestish part of her, like I said, I don't know what that would be considered, because I think it's like because this doesn't have any sleeves, so I'm assuming it's going to be the foundation of her suit, and I think that's kind of nice. I don't know if that's typically where the suit comes from in the comics or not. I mean, because obviously, like the red and blue, she's going to incorporate some Captain Marvel to it, but also including but like it having like cultural significance like that, and not forgetting where she got it from, but also what it represents of where she comes from. So I think that's kind of nice potential thing. I wonder if she's going to get Bruno to make her suit. I mean, he's the one that made her mask and everything. But I do like that we are getting her more acquainted with her abilities, how she's using it, like using things as shields, and obviously breaking her fall during the fights. I'll obviously constantly like using it around her powers around her foot to kind of like, especially like during that sequence, like the bus was stuck to their vehicle, she put on her, like she summoned the energy around her boot and then just like kicked hard to separate the two, even making like a little bit of a ramp around that family that was on the bike that was in the middle of the street. So I love the incorporation of her abilities. It seems like Adam is dead because seems like Kareem ended up killing him. So they're down one. Also shows like, right, they're not like immortal or anything. They might be from a different dimension, but they're probably like, their physiology is probably slightly different, but it's probably like a Time Lord. Like, you could still pretty die easily like a human. It's probably like that. It's like, you're not like it's probably like the same thing as like, yeah, Thor when he kind of had lost all his powers. It's probably kind of similar to that. During the first Thor movie when he wasn't worthy anymore. When the Bengals got struck, I was actually surprised by that. And I was like, okay, so I was like, is this a vision? But then she was actually kind of bumping into people. So I'm like, so did she actually get teleported back in time? Because it looks like this is during partition. So she's going to get to know the full story of what went down. Like I said, I think the other clandestines, Aisha didn't want to work with them because she found out like what it would mean in the long run. But I think maybe the Bengal got left behind because maybe she left it with Sana, but somehow got transported to the other world. So maybe there's some correlation there. I mean, once again, like, why haven't we seen her at all? Like, she should be around because she would, not unless they did kill her, but I'm assuming she's in the other world. Which I guess that also explains what happened, once again, for a brief period of time, Kamala ended up seeing into that world in the first episode when she put the bangle on. Understanding why she is the special case that she can use her powers and they manifest the way that they do, and why she is the only one that can really draw upon Nor and use it in this plane of existence like she can. But I think it's going to be an interesting episode next episode, her learning so much about what, finally kind of getting a peek at the truth of what went down during partition with her grandmother and her great-grandmother, and finding out, probably getting more insight into the clandestines, because I still get the feeling like the reason why I feel like I'm still saying her name, because I keep almost saying like Najima, but it's like Najma, I think. Like I said, I'm probably still butchering it. Cameron's mom. I think she... and the others turn against Aisha. Like, that's kind of my thought. That's why she had that heel turn, as someone put it, so quickly last episode. I think it's because of that, because she's like, right, we already had to wait so long because it was up to Aisha to bring us back, but she didn't for whatever reason. Either she chose not to, and it's like, right, we've waited decades, we're not going to wait any longer. You know, it's like, even if we have to force you because your great-grandmother didn't want to do what we wanted her to, so we're going to get you to do it. So we'll see how that all plays out, what this Vision sort of quest that she's on next episode, what that necessarily looks like. I'm very, very excited to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.